How do the Los Angeles Rams quarter season awards shake out? MVP, Rookie of the Year, who needs more playing time? Find out on this episode of the Locked On Rams podcast.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rams Nation, what is going on? As always, it is your boy, your host, Sosa Kremenjas. I'm a fantasy analyst at PFF and your host here at the Locked On Rams podcast, your number one daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Rams and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Before we dive into this quarter season awards episode, I want to tell you guys quickly that amazing selections and reliably low prices are available to you. All the parts your car will ever need. All you have to do is visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. And as I mentioned, this episode is going to be a little bit different. I wanted to do this last week prior to the fifth game of the season, which is a quarter way through the season. But now it's a little bit weird. Obviously, we have 17 games, so there is no legitimate quarter of the season. And last week just wasn't a very good week with the Rams on a short week. I obviously had a bit of a condensed schedule with the Rams playing on Thursday. So now we get an extra couple of days to preview the Rams and the Giants going into this next week in week 6. And that affords us the opportunity to be able to dive into some of these awards. And so I've jotted some pretty good ones here, I think. We got the MVP, Rookie of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Surprise Player of the Year, Disappointment of the Year. Of course, there's also some disappointing players on the roster. And then somebody that we've labeled as needs more playing time moving forward in this second half of the season, I guess you can call it. So we'll start right at the top with the MVP, the most important player. And I think for the most part, this is probably going to be a common selection for everyone across the board. I mean, if you asked 100 Rams fans who their MVP this season was, I think everyone would say it was quarterback Matthew Stafford, right? It always starts at the quarterback position. We know that this guy is either going to be the reason a team sinks or swims. And right now, Matthew Stafford is playing very good football. And not just that, but he's got the Rams in a position where they're 4-1, and he's a major part of the reason why the offense is so good. And regardless of which metric you look at, whether it's EPA per play, raw yardage statistics, points per game, whatever the case is, Stafford is playing good football right now. And of course, there's still a bit of a place for him to improve, right? He's not playing borderline elite quarterback one, best in the league type football right now. But I think this is pretty much what we expected when the Rams traded for Stafford was, you know, they were going to need maybe 6, 8, 10 weeks to really get that chemistry down and look like they are basically operating at 100%. So we haven't seen the offense at 100% yet, I don't think. And, you know, everything that we expected from him, the good footwork, very talented arm. I mean, he can change his arm angles, his throws. He can throw the football downfield. There's really no limit to what he can do with his arm. He's going to look for the big play before he settles for the shorter play, can take checkdowns, can read the field, can go through his progressions. Everything we've wanted to see, we've seen. I mean, you look at the numbers here. Of course, I have all the PFF numbers, thankfully. 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's got 7 big-time throws so far this season. Only 3 turnover-worthy passes, which is obviously awesome to see. Only been sacked 4 times. And a lot of that, of course, always comes back to the offensive line. But some of that is also on the quarterback. A lot of people do think sacks are a quarterback statistic. And I'm not necessarily all the way there. But at the same time, these guys can either help or hurt their offensive line. And we talked about the way that he can move inside of a pocket, his mobility, ability to climb the pocket, know when to escape, throw the football, know that he has an internal clock in the back of his head there. That stuff helps the offensive line. So they've played great too, but he's also helped them hold up in those situations. You look at the yards per attempt, 9.2. That is so much different than what we saw last year with Jared Goff. And the average depth of target, 9.4. A lot of these metrics, a lot of these numbers are among the best in football this season. And it's part of the reason why the offense is playing so well right now. I think it's just they're looking for the big shot. They're getting it more often than not. And sometimes they're not, of course. You know, they're going to have some of those glitches still, like I mentioned. The chemistry is just still not 100% there. But for the most part, this offense has been everything you could possibly ask for. And all of that always comes back to the quarterback play. And so far, Stafford, in my opinion, the MVP of this team, he's been absolutely outstanding through 5 games. The next up was a smaller award here. I wanted to get the Rookie of the Year award out of the way. And obviously, the Rams don't have many rookies contributing to their team right now. So for me, I went with Robert Rochelle. Obviously, he's not played a ton. I mean, he's only been targeted 7 times this season, given up 5 receptions for 56 receiving yards and 1 touchdown, as well as 2 first downs. But he also has 2 forced incompletions on the season, and he's been pretty decent. I mean, he's been kind of thrusted into a tough spot here, especially last week in his first start as a rookie. It's a short week. You're going against DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, arguably the best duo at receiver in football, or one up for sure, and a quarterback in Russell Wilson, who's basically played at an MVP level for the better part of 10 years now, and he's going to push the ball deep. So it's not like, you have 7-yard routes to cover. You literally have to cover every blade of grass when you're playing Russell Wilson. So he was tossed into a tough spot there. I think for the most part, obviously his performance was not very good, but in general, the Rams just don't really have any rookies playing that great right now. I think, across the board, these guys are either not contributing at all or just playing very, very small special teams roles. Guys like Jacob Harris, for example. You look at Jake Funk, he's got a few snaps on offense, but nothing really. Tutu Atwell, not played on offense at all, not really done anything as a punt or kick returner either. And so this left me with a very, very small choice here. And I ultimately chose to go with Rochelle. I think you could probably pick, really anyone here, and it wouldn't be too egregious of a choice. So we pretty much expected this. There was not going to be a huge contribution from the rookie class this season. And so far, it's panned out to be that way. But I think this is a positive because this team is ready to compete for a Super Bowl right now, and they did not have a first-round pick in this draft. So with that being said, you probably weren't expecting to get a lot out of this rookie class, and so far, that's absolutely been the case. So I think so far you have to feel pretty good about where those guys are. In just a second, we'll dive into the Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year awards, which are very interesting and tough choices here. Of course, you guys can always follow us on Twitter at QB's MEP, at Locked On Rams, and on YouTube at Locked On Rams. And I got to give a quick shout out to my guy, Brad Motter. He chose both the Rams and the Chargers to go 5-0 to start the season on his betting slips. Obviously, neither team was able to do that. Both went 4-1, so just a smidge away, man. But that was some interesting bets there. I mean, when he told me that, I thought he was insane. Clearly, he was onto something. If you guys want to get in on some of that action, go check out one of our sponsors, betonline.ag. They'll take care of you. They are your number one spot for all your pro and college football action this season. They've got everything open there, from the $500,000 NFL Mega Contest to the $200,000 Survivor Contest. You can go head to their website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, from football to basketball to boxing, all the way to horse racing. Don't wait and take advantage right now while all the offers are still available for the 2021 season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. And as I mentioned, now we can dive into the Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year awards. And these are two juicy awards here because some guys obviously couldn't win MVP. Only one could go to the MVP award, and that was the quarterback position, the most important player on the team. So I'm going to go with the OPOY first here, Offensive Player of the Year. And I think most of us would probably once again be in agreement here. It's got to be wide receiver Cooper Kupp. This guy nearly won the MVP award for me. That's how good he's been. He's been arguably the best receiver in football this year. Like, he's been that dominant. He's taken a big step in his development, I think. But not just that. I mean, he's been given the workload necessary to put up some of those crazy and gaudy statistics that maybe outside of fans in LA or Rams fans can now look at the Rams and be like, oh my God, this guy's putting up these crazy numbers. Maybe he is better than we thought. So everyone that's a Rams fan that's watched the Rams since 2017 when he was drafted in the 3rd round knows how good he is. Like, this guy's been killing cornerbacks in the slot for many, many years now. You look at the numbers, 54 targets, by far the first on the Rams. The next closest is Robert Woods with 38, so not really that close. First in receptions at 37, first in yards, 523, first in yards after the catch, 209, first in touchdowns with 5, first in first downs with 22. He is first across the board for this offense. There's no questions asked. 5 missed tackles forced on the season, 14.1 receiving yards per reception, and then a 3.04 yards per route run metric, which is an important efficiency metric that we take note of at PFF. It's basically the holy grail of comparing receivers there. And a 3.04 is absolutely elite. Like, anything above 1.5 is very good. 1.8 is like, this guy is balling. 3.04, I don't know if he can keep that up, but if he's at that point throughout the rest of the season, that is just absurd. And that just goes to show you how productive this guy is on a per route basis, on a per target basis, a per reception basis. Every metric that you look at, Cooper Kupp is absolutely killing it right now. And I think when you watch him, the chemistry between he and Stafford is clearly there. Still, there is some more to be had. I think you've seen at least maybe 5 or 6 passes off the top of my head that were easy completions for guys of this caliber that they haven't connected on this year, just maybe because of the chemistry, like I mentioned, but 2 players that are very clearly comfortable with each other. And I think it goes to show you just how exciting the usage is. I mean, you look at Cooper Kupp, it's more than what we've seen in the past where, the Rams would plug him in that slot spot or maybe motion him closer to the line of scrimmage and kind of play like a tight end type of role. Now you see him lining up in the backfield, coming out of the backfield. You see him winning downfield, across, deep crossers. The Rams are legitimately using this guy everywhere. And I think it's only helped him because this guy is so good. You want to try to get him the football as much as possible. And they've done a great job at doing that this season. Now flipping the page to the other side, the defensive player of the year. And this one is tough. I mean, there's 2 candidates that I think anyone would feel comfortable giving it to in any given season, whether that's Aaron Donald at D tackle or Jalen Ramsey at cornerback. But I got to go with Jalen Ramsey. I mean, I think Aaron Donald's amazing. He's the best player in football. I've mentioned it so many times on this podcast. There's no doubt about it in my mind. But I think what Ramsey's done this season is maybe just a little bit more impressive because Donald still has yet to sort of get into that legendary type mode, I feel like. But Ramsey, on the other hand, this guy's been outstanding. I mean, he is so good. Every time I watch him, I don't think there's a way that he could possibly get better. And yet somehow he always manages to top what he did either last week, last season, last month, whatever the case is. I mean, you look at some of these numbers, 33 targets. He's only allowed 21 receptions, 210 yards on the season, 1 touchdown, and 13 first downs. He's also got an interception, as well as 6 forced incompletions. And he's asked to do a lot for this defense. I mean, he's lining up on the boundary. He's lining up across from number 1 wide receivers. He's asked to play in the slot a ton. He's asked to blitz. You remember some of those screen plays, at least 2 or 3, where he just tosses the blocker away with pure and sheer disregard and then goes to tackle the ball carrier. I mean, it's crazy that one cornerback can take on basically 2 guys, 3 guys in one play and just win. Like, this is absurd. This is not normal. You're not supposed to see that from that cornerback position, which is why teams are throwing that screen, because when you have 2 blockers against 1 defender and another guy, the third player who's catching the football, you should have that numbers advantage. They should not be making the play on the defensive side of the ball, yet Ramsey is so physical, so talented, and just refuses to get blocked, and obviously smart enough to know that a screen is coming, that he just negates the entire play, and he still gets a tackle for loss. So it really goes to show you how special of a talent this guy is, how much work he's putting in terms of film study to know that stuff like that is coming. And I think the Rams can still use him more optimally than they have this season. I mean, you look at defensive coordinator Raheem Morris, I don't think he's done a great job in terms of how he's utilized Jalen Ramsey. Like, this guy is the wide receiver eraser. Like, that's what he is. He's the best cover corner in football, the best corner in football in general, but you're paying him $25 million a year to cover guys. And last year, I thought Brandon Staley did a masterful and perfect job, really, at utilizing his talents, right? You want this guy to erase number 1 wide receivers, and the Rams haven't really allowed him to shadow guys this season, when I think they probably should. And even if you don't want him to just shadow guys outright, I think you can utilize him way more usefully than just putting him in the slot and letting him blitz. You have pass rushers for that reason. You don't need your best coverage player to blitz 10 times a game. Like, that's just not the way you want to utilize this guy, in my opinion. And in my opinion, I would want him on the back end covering as much as possible. You're going to follow DK Metcalf. You're going to follow DeAndre Hopkins. You're going to follow number 1 wide receivers. That's how I would do it. That's how Brandon Staley did it last year. In my opinion, that was the perfect way to use him. Regardless, Ramsey is so good and so talented that he's going to produce wherever you put him. But I just think in general, the best way for him to basically put his mark on the game is to cover the best wide receiver of an opposing team. And he's going to wash that guy out, essentially. So in my opinion, he can't really do anything else than he's asked. But what he's asked to do, he still does at the best level in football. So he gets my award for the Defensive Player of the Year. We're going to get into one more here, Surprise Player of the Year. And I think there's a handful of good options here. For me, I'm going to go with Van Jefferson or Brian Allen. Take your pick. I mean, both of these guys have been outstanding. Van Jefferson, because I just thought Deshaun Jackson was going to get much more run this season than Jefferson did, yet Jefferson is the guy who stood out. I mean, this guy looks like the exact type of player that Robert Woods is. I mean, he can run routes. He's going to get open. He's got great hands. Other than one drop pass that I can remember, I think it was this past week against Seattle where he runs a slant and he might have scored. He might have gotten taken down at the 1 or 2 yard line if he catches it. But, the ball went right through his hands on a slant route there. Other than that, he's been unreal. I mean, he's winning deep downfield. His routes are super crisp. He's getting open. I just think he and Stafford need to continue working on that chemistry. And when it gets settled and they get really comfortable in that regard, there's really no telling who's going to stop this guy. I mean, he literally looks like the exact type of player like Robert Woods is, where you can line him up outside the numbers, inside the numbers, in the slot. He's tough. He's going to block. He's going to do a little bit of everything. Think he's been absolutely outstanding. So not necessarily surprised that he's good, just that he's been this productive this early. I really thought Deshaun Jackson was going to get a lot more run than he was. And then the next player, Brian Allen. I mean, this was the guy that we all had circled as a potential liability going into the season, yet through 5 games, he's only allowed 4 pressures on the season and 1 single sack. He's graded out pretty good. And in my opinion, he's probably having a better season than Austin Blythe did last year, who's, of course, the guy that he replaced. So just an incredible performance so far. He's not a world beater. He's not elite by any means. But in general, I think, when you just look at this guy, even if he's league average, which is basically what I think he is, if not like that top 10, top 12 level, you could not ask for more. I mean, the Rams really just wanted this guy to not be a liability. And a lot of us thought that he was going to be the reason the offensive line was going to be subpar of the season. Yet they've been arguably the best offensive line in football. And it always begins with that center position. There's been no bad snaps, no terrible snaps, no fumbles from that position, no outright getting dominated. And he's gone against some really good players this season so far, talking about guys like Akeem Hicks in week 1, DeForest Buckner in week 2, Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh. Like, there's been some legitimate challenges for these guys on the interior. And I think Brian Allen, man, shout out to him for stepping up, because he's been absolutely awesome for the Rams. Rock solid. You really cannot ask for much more from that position, in my opinion. So either him or Van Jefferson, either or, can get that surprise player of the year, in my opinion. In just a second here, we're going to dive into the disappointing player of the year, as well as who needs more playing time moving forward. Before we get to that, make sure to tune back in throughout the rest of this week. We're going to keep you guys updated and give you the preview for everything you need to know about the Los Angeles Rams and New York Giants in week 6. And of course, you guys have heard me talk about Rock Auto on this podcast many times. You don't have to deal with the long wait times at your mechanic, outrageous prices, or just not being able to get a certain car part or whatever you need. You can go visit rockauto.com. They're a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. They've got every make and model that you can imagine. So whether your car is new or old, they're going to have you covered. It doesn't matter. Just go check them out. If you're a person who likes to fix things yourself, or you're just a professional who's looking for reliably low prices, you should check out Rock Auto. Go to their website, click on all the available parts. Everything is there. Amazing selections, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us section, so they know that we sent you. As always, thank you guys so much for always making us your first daily listen here at the Locked On Rams podcast. For your second daily listen, go check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL podcast. These guys are going to keep you covered for all the biggest and latest news across the NFL every single day in under 30 minutes for free wherever you get your podcasts. Now we can pick up with this final segment here and take a look at the disappointing player of the year. And ironically enough, I feel like there's maybe 2 options here, and both of them happen to fall on the defensive side of the ball in the same unit. I mean, it's in the secondary, and there's probably a handful of people that could have different selections here. I mean, maybe Kenny Young, maybe somebody else. I don't really know. But for me, it's got to be these guys in the secondary. Take your pick, either Taylor Rapp at safety or cornerback David Long Jr. I just think both of these guys could have been playing better this year. Now, Long, I think maybe the expectation was a little bit unfair. They yanked him very quick. He only lasted 4 games before he was pulled for Robert Rochelle. Don't necessarily think that was fair to him, and I just don't think they utilized him well. Like I mentioned with Jalen Ramsey, I think Raheem Morris might be having a tough time knowing his personnel right now, which is confusing to me. But I mean, David Long in general, I didn't think he was playing that bad. I mean, he gave up 12 receptions on the year on 17 targets for 168 yards receiving and 1 touchdown and 6 first downs. I mean, that's not egregious or bad by any means. I mean, it's less yards than Darius Williams, less yards than Jalen Ramsey. And I'm not saying he's better than those guys. He's probably targeted a lot less than those guys. But at the same time, I mean, you can't really ask for that much more, in my opinion, as long as he was somewhat close to Troy Hill. And I think had you given him the whole season and maybe utilized him a little bit more in the slot as opposed to on the boundary where he's maybe not as talented or as useful, I think he could have given you a better season. So partially up to David Long there. I think you just needed to have a little bit tighter coverage, especially in that last game that he started in week 4 against the Cardinals, where he was picked on a little bit. But at the same time, I don't think Raheem Morris did him any favors this season. So take your pick there, whether you want to blame Raheem Morris, whether you want to blame David Long. Either way, could be considered one of the disappointing players this year. The other one, like I mentioned, Taylor Rapp. I mean, this is a guy who's entering his 3rd season right now. Last year, basically a complete write-off. I mean, starts the season injured, loses his job to Jordan Fuller. Then he comes back. He just never really looks right. Gets hurt again, goes on IR. Just a terrible season all around. His rookie season, though, 2 years ago, a lot better. Thought he was a very productive player, someone who was promising. Now in his 3rd season, he's been arguably one of the worst defenders on the team, if not the worst starting defender. I mean, he's just not been very good. Targeted 20 times, given up 15 receptions, 218 yards in his coverage, as well as 1 touchdown and 13 first downs. So, I mean, it's just not been great. He's given up over 1 yard per coverage snap, which is not great. And just in general, I mean, I feel like this guy's just not being utilized again. Once again, it feels like this is a theme in his best role. I would love to see this guy as a sub-package linebacker, a dime backer, as they call it, or a money backer, whatever you want to call it. The Dion Buchanan role that, if Rams fans remember, he used to play for the Cardinals. They sort of invented that. Not really, but they utilized him in that role, where you want this guy around the line of scrimmage, covering maybe running backs coming out of the backfield, sniffing in that rat type of role in the middle of the field, where you're going to let him just utilize his eyes and his zone coverage and try to make tackles short of the sticks. Whereas the Rams are not really doing that. And I just don't think that's his best role. I don't think you want this guy utilized how the Rams are using him right now. And I just don't think that's his best role. I don't even think he's the best safety on the team or the second best safety. And I would rather have somebody else out there who's going to be more productive in that type of role, which takes me into the final award here, or the final question here. Who needs more playing time? For me, it's Terrell Burgess. This is a guy that I have circled as somebody who I thought was legitimately going to take that next step into maybe not stardom this season, but at least somewhat close to it. A very solidified starter type of player or role. And of course, the Rams had different ideas. He's not even barely played at all. I think he has maybe 2 or 3 snaps on defense this year, which I just hate. I mean, this is a guy you drafted in the 3rd round, super talented, probably your most versatile defensive back on the roster. Can play nickel, can probably play outside corner in a pinch, can play near the line of scrimmage, can play dime backer, can play 2 high coverages, can play single high coverages there in that safety role. I hate the fact that this guy's not playing. It makes no sense to me. I really think the Rams are doing themselves a disservice right now by not utilizing his skill set. I just cannot see any way you could justify keeping Taylor Rapp out there over Terrell Burgess. In my opinion, you need to yank that as quick as possible. The quicker you do it, the better off your secondary will be. And in my opinion, the better off the team will be for that. I really think that Terrell Burgess could be utilized in this team a lot more than he is. Even if it's just in a smaller package type of role, you see Nick Scott, the 3rd safety on the roster, he's played a handful of snaps in each game. He's playing 10, 15, 20 snaps, and he's been solid in that role. He's not a bad player. But why are those snaps not going to Terrell Burgess? That's genuinely what I'm curious about. If you want Taylor Rapp out there for whatever reason as a starter, fair enough. But then why is Nick Scott getting those 3rd safety snaps over Terrell Burgess? I don't know. That's a question that I wish we could get the answer to. Maybe we will here soon. Head coach Sean McVay did say that Burgess was a guy that they were going to evaluate moving forward and try to find a way to utilize a bit more. So we'll see if they stick to that word or if it's just kind of coach speak. But I certainly think that this is a guy that can not only be a solidified starter on that back end, he could be one of the key players in that secondary and for this defense. And I genuinely think that he could be a big piece that the Rams are missing right now when it comes to just tightening up their coverage on the back end and making this defense a lot better under Raheem Morris's tutelage. It's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Rams podcast. As always, I appreciate you guys so much for always making us your first daily listen here at the Locked On Rams pod. Make sure to tune back in tomorrow when we start flipping the page to take a look at the Los Angeles Rams and New York Giants contest in Week 6. the Rams could improve to 5-1 on the season, which I think is everything that all of us are hoping for right now. Just a reminder, you guys can always come connect with us on Twitter at QBsMEP, at Locked On Rams, and on YouTube at Locked On Rams. Please subscribe or follow to get our latest episodes, content, breaking news, and a whole lot more.